Tonight's subject is solar panels and solar power, how to use them. There's a couple more printouts over there if you didn't see them when you came in. There's nothing fancy. I only made 15 copies, so one or two you might have to share, but we should be pretty good. There's nothing in these that are groundbreaking or not available on YouTube. And one of the happy realities of this is there's a lot of opinions, there's a lot of ways to do it right. I'm going to try to keep my opinion out of it and just present the facts, but there's so much information you almost can't help doing it. I'm going to present the basics. You got to think about what you're going to do before you go and spend your own good hard money on it, and find out that's not exactly what you intend to do, because there's a lot of options. We just can't cover them all. All right. So there's a couple realities that you just have to bite off if you're going to get into solar power. It's not a Band-Aid, it's not a bullet, it's not a beam. It's a force multiplier. If you don't have all your basics set up, all the power in the world isn't going to do you any good. You're going to be doing your washing machine just fine, and you're going to be starving to death. This is bad. So keep in mind your priorities. Solar's expensive, guys. It really is. There's really good reasons to do it. There's ways to cut down on how much you're going to spend. Mostly planning ahead, thinking about what you're doing. But you can spend way too much and regret it later. It's not hard to do. It's expensive, but ultimately it can pay for itself. You're putting down a lot of money right now. In 30 years, in 20 years, you've broken even. It's a trade-off if you think the power might go out in 5 years. So it's definitely something worth thinking about. Smaller is safer. Smaller is easier. Smaller is cheaper. It's easier to do it legally if you go with a small system. What I'm talking about is safer. If you have 600 volts at 100 amps coming into your house, you just made things very, very complicated and unsafe unless you're a qualified electrician, you know everything you need to know about fuses. It's a nightmare. If you have a simple 12-volt system that runs off of just a couple panels, the worst that can happen is something melts. Maybe give yourself a small shock. And it's very possible. We've all stuck a 9-volt battery to our tongue, it hurts. Now we're talking about solar panels and large batteries. You can entirely do it safely, but put your thinking cap on before you touch this stuff. It can pay for itself over time, if you do it right. It's also very easy to take a couple grand and flush them down the toilet on something you just don't need or want anyway. So, before we get too far into different components and everything else, you kind of have to understand a couple fundamentals of the math. I'm not going to go into this too much, and the reason is, if you're studying to become a ham, you have to know it anyway. If you want to put together your own solar panel system, you're going to have to look this stuff up again anyway. And if you don't know it, we could spend this and the next 5 meetings trying to explain it. So at some point, if you're not 100% familiar with this, you're going to have to take some of my word for it, but there's a lot of resources out there. You can go back and double check and figure it out for yourself and train yourself up. The simple math is watts equals volts times amps. That's all there is to it. The best way to visualize this is if you have a pipe. You can have a pipe at 300 psi, or you can have a pipe at 2 psi. So we're going to call psi pressure voltage. Now that pipe could be 10 feet wide, or it could be a skinny little garden hose. And we're going to call that amperage. Now, if I have a skinny little hose with a lot of pressure and I turn it on, I can fill up a bucket. I can also take a really big hose with almost no pressure in it, water barely coming out, and fill up a bucket. and I can do it in the same amount of time, with a really skinny hose going really fast and a really big hose going really slow. So at the same point, everything has to add up. You can have volts, you can have amps, but they have to come together to be worth a certain amount of something. In water, we call that gallons. In electricity, we call that watts. So volts times amps equals watts. All right, I have a hose sitting here. It's got a certain amount of pressure, and it has a certain width to it. No problem, but there's no gallons there. You could say, how many gallons is in that pipe? And I would say, what, in the very end? All the way back to the water refinery? But if I turn it on, and I fill up a bucket, and then I turn it off, and I time it, I can say, this pipe is capable of 1 bucket's worth per hour, let's say. So you have the potential in volts and amps in the pipe, which eventually becomes, well, which is a total watts. Turn it on, and now you actually have a bucket of water. You actually have an amount of power that you can work with. You filled up the bucket, and it took this long. So we can say, if you take a watt, which is an actual unit of measurement, and you use it for a certain amount of time, you have a watt hour. And that is something that is quantifiable. If it was the water, it's this amount of water in the bucket for this amount of time. We call those gallons because it's a lot easier with pitchers and stuff to measure it out, but it's all the same thing. All right. Now on the second page, there's a whole bunch of diagrams on the second and third page. If you look at the second page on the top, this is basically a no parts left out solar panel system. This is all the crap you could possibly pack into a solar panel system and use if that's what you actually needed. You got the PV array, the photovoltaic array, solar panels. That makes energy, puts it into a charge controller. The only thing a charge controller does is to make sure that the energy goes to the battery in a way that's not going to destroy it. Batteries are sensitive, batteries are expensive. You don't want to put the wrong kind of energy into a battery when you're charging it. You have to have a charge controller. You got the battery, the inverter / charger. For our purposes, it's just an inverter. All right? The only reason you need a charger is if you're getting a different source of power and you need to charge the battery from the back end in. Since we're not going to be talking about anything as fancy as grid tied or using generators, all you need is the inverter part of that. All the inverter does is it takes this weak, weird 12-volt direct current battery power, and it makes it into power that you can plug your wall into. Now, if you have an appliance at home, it's not going to run on 12-volt DC. It runs on 110 AC. It takes the one, it turns it into the other. So if you want to run things only on 12-volt DC, which is an option I would probably recommend looking at, because you can totally cut out the inverter and the inverter if you replace your wall power appliances with direct current appliances. But those are what each of the individual items do in the system. All right, there are options, and more options. We can't discuss each of these different components, all of their options. It would be a whole night discussion, and I don't have that much coffee. But we can at least name them, and so we can try to isolate some that are maybe worth our attention later when we're designing a system. Solar panels come in monocrystalline, polycrystalline, or amorphous. Monocrystalline are the most expensive per watt out. They also take up the least space. So if you're putting together a system and you have a very small roof, and you figured everything else out, and you can't do it with polycrystalline, you might be able to do it with monocrystalline. Polycrystalline are cheaper, they take up more space. Per watt, they're cheaper, which is the most important thing. So to get a certain amount of power, the polycrystalline panels are going to get you that amount of power with less money. Amorphous are kind of weird side shoot. They work good in low light. The other two don't. The only reason to consider an amorphous panel is if you have a weird lighting situation and you're kind of trying to make something work. Don't expect fantastic results. All right, charge controllers. Acronyms, they really mean nothing to us, but it's pulse width modulation or maximum power point tracking. MPPT is more expensive. It does a better job of charging your battery to a higher level and more safely. Batteries are expensive. You can do a fine job with a PWM, but if you're looking at a robust system that's going to last, it might be worth the investment into MPPT. All the batteries we're going to talk about tonight are lead acid batteries. They have lead plates in them, and they got acid in them. That makes them heavy. There are other alternatives out there, but the technology really isn't quite at the point where they're useful for us quite yet. But before you go out and buy, take a look around. All right? Who knows? There's a new Tesla wall. Very popular, not quite worth it for our purposes at this point, but the technology is going crazy, so keep your heads up on that one. When you're looking at lead acid battery, you have a regular deep cycle lead acid battery, which is going to look exactly like your car battery other than size from the outside, and it's going to have the caps to take off. If you're running a solar system with regular lead acid deep cycle batteries, you have to maintain them. These are the cheapest option. They're also ones that through neglect, you can cause your system to crash. I wouldn't personally recommend them. For a little bit more money, you get sealed lead acid batteries. Exact same thing. You don't have to top them off. You don't have to maintain them. They work fairly well. AGM batteries are awesome. They are more stable. They're less likely to get damaged. They take charges very well, and they last longer because of it. They cost more money by far. Gel, don't even worry about them. They cost way too much money. They're very sensitive to charging conditions. Maybe if you were trying to run a hospital and you could control the temperatures perfectly for the next 30 years and you needed great power, that would be a good option. But for us, no go. And thankfully, the last item on our components list is inverters. These either come as pure sine wave or modified sine wave. The only reason to get a pure sine wave inverter, which is not the only, but the best reason to get a pure sine wave inverter, which is astronomically more expensive, is if you're running very sensitive electronic equipment. If you had some sort of radio that actually worked off of 110 power, and they do exist, you might consider it. Certain watches, computers, things like that. It's worth considering the extra money for that form of inverter. All right, so that's the crap. You just have to know that. Now we can actually start figuring out what's worth our time doing and what isn't. Because there's a lot of stuff that isn't worth our time. You drive down the street, you see a lot of really cool full roof panel systems. And what happened is somebody decided they wanted a solar panel system. Let's say they chose to go with batteries and everything, and they just bought the system outright. All right? They paid somebody who's an electrician to come in and put it on. They paid the construction worker to nail it to the roof. Somebody had to wire it for them. It's all one big system, and it runs their whole damn house, and it cut down their electric bill. And that's great, except they don't have a single clue as to how anything works, if something breaks. If something breaks, they don't know how to fix it. Their best option is to get on the phone, call the guy who installed it and said, hey, help me out. They own the system, they don't know anything about it. It's a huge power system, so I wouldn't even want to touch it if I could avoid it. That much electricity scares me, and I like doing solar panels. So, if you bring it down, instead of taking out a second mortgage or a bank loan to pay somebody to do something that's really only going to succeed in cutting down your power bill, you can do the same thing part by part until you accomplish as much as you want to accomplish. And you can do it on a week by week or month by month basis instead of going to the bank and paying interest on a whole system that's supposed to be saving you money. So let's look at some projects that might actually make sense. This is what we did. We did the auxiliary living room lighting. This is definitely not essential. We can all go by without it, but it's something we use every day, so it actually is paying for itself back. All the money that I put into the system is coming back into my pocket. The whole system cost, for me, it was about $300. That's because I got an extra set or two of batteries. You could do it for $250. All right. The system that I bought uses AGM batteries. It could last 25 years. All right. So you take $300 and you divide it by 25 years. You're really not paying much for the system. All right. In fact, you're probably paying less than you are the local power company. And when the lights go out, you still have lights. That's kind of cool.
For that kind of system, what do you got hooked up to it? What's it run?
It is so weak that it's laughable. I have a 45 watt amorphous panel, which is the least efficient. And the reason I got that was because it was on sale at Harbor Freight. All right, it cost me $139 on sale. They have sales twice a year. These panels aren't the greatest, but if you want to get your feet dirty with just local supplies, without ordering online and paying shipping, it's a great way to start. You can get something small going. The kit comes with the battery, or comes with the battery charger. It comes with two really crappy 12-volt lights that just plug in. So you already have a system minus the batteries, and that's for $139. I bought a bunch of batteries, which brought me up to a little under $300. $300 plus wiring and crimps and all that nonsense. And I took an old inverter that I had to run appliances out of a truck. You know, if you're ever camping, you can buy those small 100-watt inverters. And I plug in 2 lines of Christmas tree lights. If I feel like the 2 LED high efficiency 12-volt lights aren't enough. The 12-volt lights are fine for getting around the house, but if you want to sit down and read or something, I turn on the Christmas tree lights. And that's it. For $300, I have light all night if I need it. And even if the power goes out, it's not connected to anything, it's not complicated. I flip a switch and I still have lights. That's great. All right, if you have a chest freezer in your basement, it would kind of stink if the power went out and now you got 140 pounds of frozen food in your basement waiting to go bad. All right? You get the least amount of light in the winter. But who cares? We're talking about backing up a freezer here. You have access to cold in the winter. So, you can make a very educated guess about how much power you need off of this thing. Go online or go to your stores, buy the supplies. My estimate is $400 or less. That totally depends on your freezer, how old it is, how efficient it is, how often you open it. All of these things are going to affect how many watts per day you need to put into this thing. But that would be a great product, a great project. You could do it easily, you could do it cheaply, you got something that's gonna keep going and it's gonna make your life a little bit easier if stuff goes bad. Now this is a fun one. I didn't put a price tag on it because there are so many variables. It's not feasible. But if you have access to a shallow well, you can basically water your crops for free all year long, or your cattle, or your whatever your flavor is. Now, if you want on-demand, high-power water rushing over your body hot in a shower, that's something else entirely. But if you set up a system where a very low yield pump was working all day and just feeding a reservoir, and that reservoir was slowly trickling down onto the ground, you don't even need batteries. You just replace these heavy, expensive, delicate batteries with a bucket of water. Gravity's doing the work instead of electricity at that point. So all you need is a couple cheap direct current pumps and some plumbing. That's a pretty cool option. You have to be in the right location to want to make it work, but that's awesome. All right. If you have a ham radio, power goes out. You don't have a ham radio. Power the sucker. And you could do the Harbor Freight system, not expensive. I could probably run my base station radio 75 watts out on what I have right now in batteries, just because I was greedy and I bought way more batteries than I could possibly need. Batteries are expensive. They're heavy. That sucks because it's really, really good to have too many batteries. All right? If you have a system and you've made your battery bank too small, in fact, let's go ahead and we're going to skip over that second picture and we're going to go to the top of page 3. A battery costs the same no matter how many you buy at a time. If you're going to spend $20 on a battery, you're going to spend $40 on 2 batteries. You just add it up. The grocery stores don't care. But if you take a battery and you drain it to 50% and charge it up and drain it to 50% and charge it up, well, this chart isn't perfect for what I just said, but the point is you're only going to get a very limited amount of charges out of it. And then your battery's going to be dead. If you drain your battery, the same price battery, all the way down to 10% of its capacity and charge it up, you're going to get 5 or 6, 20, not much, not worth what you paid for the battery. But if you see this line, we're comparing depth of discharge in hours on the bottom, and on the left-hand side, we got expected average cycles, which means days for us. A cycle is a full charge and a full depletion. So, the closer you get to zero discharge, the more uses you get out of it. But it's not a straight line. It's kind of like me saying, I'll sell you, for $100, I'll give you 100 days worth of bread, one day at a time. For $200, I'll give you 400 days worth of bread, one day at a time. For $300, I'll give you $9,000 worth of bread, one day at a time. It's not a straight line. There is an incredible benefit from having a higher battery bank. Even though they cost a lot, set it up big at first. You're not going to damage your batteries. Every cycle will last that much longer. I mean, heck, if you look at this thing, their biggest number before you get to the top is 15,000 cycles. That's ridiculous. I think 9,000 cycles is just over 24 years. I'm not going to take out my calculator right now, but if you do the math right quick, figure it out. This is awesome. You don't really want to go over 30 years though. plan out your system, figure out what you need to do. But even a battery that's being perfectly charged, barely used at all, is a piece of equipment that's made out of plastic, lead, and acid. And they do just go bad. So electrically, you can plan on it lasting forever. Physically, it's probably only going to make it 30 years. So don't plan on it electrically lasting more than 30 years. Let's see. All right, actually, those were all of my realistic projects. Obviously, there's more of them. Think about something that might actually benefit you if the power goes out. Not something you want, something that will just be really practical to have. Instead of having an open fire in my living room when the power goes out, I flip a switch. I'm pretty psyched about that. All right. There's a bunch of resources. YouTube is just awash with really good information and really crappy information. That's just facts of life. Watch what you want, but think about what they're saying. My 3 recommendations on that list there, I think these guys, I don't even agree with all of their opinions, and sometimes they argue with each other because there's a lot of ways to do things. But they all come up with the same basic idea in the end. They're all worth listening to because they're very intelligent and more experienced than I am. All right, amateur radio is your friend. Not because of the radio aspect, because these guys work with 12 volts all day long, every day. Every kind of gizmo that could possibly do something you want to do with 12 volts, they know about, they have experience with. It's out there on the web, Racies and Marys, they know their stuff, it's worth looking at. If you want to plug your laptop into your carport that's being charged by a solar panel on the top of your truck, those are the guys to talk to. They've done it. They've already done it. They can tell you what products to buy. It's right there. Automotive stores, candy. Go in there, cheap lights, crimps for your wires, lots of fun stuff, and you don't have to go online and freak out. You can talk to somebody and say, what size crimper do I need for this? All right, truck and RV stores, online and in person. Go there, check it out. It's a good way to find a deal. Anderson power poles. If you have an appliance that is going to detach and reattach for any reason, put it on a power pole. That is every emergency standard in the book uses these things. They're freaking awesome. You can't plug them in the wrong way, but you can plug them into each other. So there's no male or female end. They're great. They're worth it. If you need to borrow a crimper, let me know. All right. So there's a couple charts we haven't looked at. Unfortunately, direct current doesn't flow through wires like we want them to. Direct current gets slowed down really bad by going through a wire. And the only way to fix that is by giving it a bigger wire. That's the second chart on page 2. It's very simple. You figure out how far you got to go, you figure out how many amps you need across the top, and it tells you how big of a wire you need. Wires are expensive. This is probably something, if you're doing a lot of power over long distance, you want to figure out into your pricing before you set up the system. Otherwise, you're going to be buying something that's technically a wire, but it's the size of a horse leg, and it costs $100 a foot. All right? That's a slight exaggeration, but pay attention to how much wire costs because it is expensive and you do need big wires in certain places. All right. Page 3 on the bottom, you got that Rastafari color chart there. There's all sorts of different size battery banks. If you just look at the 12, you would think that, well, I have a 12 volt battery, so if it has 12 volts, it's full, and if it has 6 volts, it's halfway full. That's not the case. Now, your more expensive battery chargers are going to have a nice little readout right on it, and it'll tell you exactly what's going on, and you don't have to worry about it. But if you have a piece of crap like mine that's still doing a great job at what it does, I use this chart to make sure I'm not draining my battery too much. This isn't 100%. It changes by temperature, exact type of battery, and everything else, but it's a good way to make sure you're not blowing stuff up. The next page, a headache waiting to happen. But this is how you would actually go through the process of figuring out the size of every component. Now, for every individual, there's a different way of doing this, all right? You have to decide how many days worth of power do I want in my batteries? Well, one, unless it snows, unless it's overcast, unless I have a small electrical problem and I have to fix it. At that point, you can either choose, stop using all of my electrical power, or you can have a bigger system. Batteries are expensive, but it's worth having a bigger system because that means that ultimately they're going to last longer. So this is horrible, confusing equation, but all you're going to do, you see across the top, there's 6 ovals, and those are for watt hours, actual measurements of electricity. On the very left, you start off with however many watt hours you're going to need to run your appliance, and then you follow the lines. Take a couple Advil first. I hate doing this. I'd like to be able to go through it right now, but honestly, it's not worth it. There's not going to be, it's too detailed. So if you have questions about this, let me know. Email me, ask me right now when we're done. And if you don't, there's this and a million other similar versions online that'll work just the same for you. Just make sure you're getting it from somebody intelligent, not from some crackpot who thinks he knows everything. In fact, before you spend your money, you should probably do a couple different versions of this equation from different people online and make sure you're not going to spend $1,000 on batteries that go kaputs tomorrow or in a year. The next, I probably shouldn't have even included this. This is the first novella by yours truly, and it's a tragedy, guys, because this guy had a great idea, he didn't do his research, and in the end, he ended up paying a lot of money for crap that he wasn't going to use when he needed it most. The point isn't to discourage you. The point is, think about what you actually need, what you actually want to accomplish, and then figure out how to make it happen and see if it's worth the price tag. If you don't do it in that order, you're going to end up regretting doing solar. But if you do think about it, and if you do the math, and figure out how long it's going to take to pay for itself and how reliable your system is going to be, it's more than going to pay for itself in the long run. And that's about all I got, unless anybody has questions.